bill.
House Bill 648 by Representative Firment, relative to gender reassignment procedures, provide for definitions to exclude certain services, treatments, procedures relative to reassignment, provide relative to restrictions for healthcare professionals, disciplinary procedures.
Representative Firment on your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pro Tem members, this bill simply protects kids from harm by ending the use of unproven, experimental, and irreversible chemical and surgical procedures on children in Louisiana suffering from a condition called gender dysphoria. In recent years, the United States has seen an exponential increase in the number of children who experience extreme discomfort with their biological sex. These children deserve to be treated with dignity and respect and are best served by compassionate and effective mental health care and counseling. So as we debate this legislation, I ask that you would set aside any preconceived notions that you may have about this issue and focus strictly on the available science and research. Let's remove politics, party affiliation, and divisive rhetoric from the discussion and consider what science and common sense say about this important topic affecting children and families in our state. Perhaps the most compelling evidence to consider today is the fact that several progressive European nations who pioneered chemical and surgical sex change procedures, like England, Sweden, and Finland, have completely reversed course on this issue and are now recommending counseling and watchful waiting as opposed to the use of dangerous and experimental drugs and invasive and irreversible surgeries. I'm not asking you to simply take my word for it. The well-respected, left-leaning British magazine, The Economist, published 2 thoroughly researched articles last month that analyzed how America is handling this issue, and they found it to be quite puzzling. One of the articles was entitled, "What America Has Got Wrong About Gender Medicine," with the subcaption, "Too many doctors have suspended their professional judgment." The other article was entitled, "The Evidence to Support Medicalized Gender Transition in Adolescence is Worryingly Weak," with the subcaption being, "The effectiveness and side effects of the most common treatments are not well understood." So look, if you don't trust my motives, if you don't trust my stance on this topic, please Google those articles from The Economist right now and decide for yourself if we are currently treating kids with gender dysphoria like we should be. The articles from The Economist essentially say that in America we have allowed politics to cloud our judgment and interfere with our ability to discuss this issue rationally and make decisions based on systematic research and medical science. The Economist states medical science is not supposed to work this way. Treatments are supposed to be backed by a growing body of well-researched evidence that weighs the risk and benefits of intervention. The responsibility is all the heavier when treatments are irreversible and the decisions about whether to go ahead are being made by vulnerable adolescents and their anxious parents. We know that in over 85% of kids experiencing gender dysphoria, the confusion will naturally desist with time and counseling. We also know that despite claims to the contrary, rates of suicide are not decreased and mental health outcomes are not improved by so-called gender-affirming care, which allows distressed children to self-diagnose and supposedly consent to decisions that will lead to permanent damage, including sterilization and loss of sexual function. Children do not have the maturity or the mental capacity to fully understand the consequences of these experimental procedures. Members, every single state around us has already passed similar legislation to protect their children. If we don't pass this bill, Louisiana will become the destination for these harmful procedures across the entire South. Please support this legislation and join me today in saying stop harming our kids. And I'll be happy to take any questions. And Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, at the appropriate time, I do have an amendment to offer.
Let's go to questions first. Representative Freeman with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Representative Firment, you and I had a discussion about this bill, and I know you're aware that I have a lot of opposition to it from the area where I represent. But you just said we might become the destination for these kinds of medical procedures. At what point did you come up with that conclusion? Because where does that evidence come from?
Representative Freeman, I think it stands to reason that if all of these states around us have banned these procedures, then logically they would come to Louisiana seeking these procedures as the closest geographically.
And so, did you know that we don't actually provide? What procedures do you know that we provide? Because from what I understand from the hospitals, that we don't have the procedure. Which procedures are you specifically talking about? I wasn't in committee, so
this bill would specifically, and it's very narrow in focus, it would specifically prohibit chemical and surgical treatments designed to alter the appearance of a child opposite to that of his biological sex.
Okay, so what happens for puberty blockers that are sometimes used for gymnasts, for example? We have
this bill would not impact that situation.
And how do you know that? Because we have lots of unintended consequences when we pass legislation in here.
Because the bill was carefully drafted in a manner that it would not affect those situations.
So gymnasts are not affected, or anybody else who needs, like specifically there's certain, I think it's called PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, where they need to have, is that specifically in this bill, that someone with polycystic ovary syndrome?
Yes, so the bill clearly specifies that it only applies to procedures designed to alter the appearance of a child's sex to that opposite of his or her biological sex.
Okay, so it will not affect women who are on menopausal hormones, because we do have plenty of women in the state who take
Absolutely
hormones.
not.
What about regulation for hormones for after brain injury?
Absolutely not.
I have to check on all these things. So, do you believe parents have rights?
Sure.
So, where are the parents' rights in this particular scenario?
Representative Freeman, unfortunately, the state is required to step in and protect kids every day. No one in Louisiana has a right to harm a child.
But what about the parents' rights to do what they think is best for their child?
Yeah.
If they have been through
one in
2
Louisiana
years
has
of counseling and other things to decide that this is the best potential treatment for their child.
Yeah, there's no evidence to suggest that this is ever the preferential treatment, and these procedures unquestionably are harmful to children, and no one in Louisiana has a right to make those decisions.
Do you have any transgender children in your district?
I think we've got about 40,000 people in each of our districts or
in your
more.
district. I'm asking specifically about your district, because we are, I know we're making a law for the entire state. So do you have?
Oh, I'm sure I do.
Have any of them contacted
It would be
you?
speculation, but yeah, I'm sure that I do.
And have you spoken to any of those families?
No.
Did you know that I have several families in my district who do not understand why the state is going to tell them how to treat their children medically?
Yeah, Representative Freeman, I'm optimistic that this bill will protect children in your district just like it will mine.
And Representative Firment, what do you think once we pass a piece of legislation like this? Next, are we going to tell them they can't have a knee surgery or an ACL repair after a football injury?
Yeah, if you want to bring that legislation, you're more than welcome to. This bill
think we should pass something about
this bill is very narrowly focused, and I've laid that out for you. So I don't want to talk about any other medical conditions.
But you can assure me that it's not going to affect hormones for any other children who are receiving hormones for other reasons.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, Representative Landry for a question.
Rep. Firment, excuse me, would your bill prohibit a medical doctor from referring a family to a provider, for example, out of state who performs this kind of care?
No.
Okay. Would this affect the ability of the minor to seek out other medical care?
I think mental health is extremely important, and I'm all in favor of mental health.
Well, if I'm asking because this situation happened in another state where a trans person went to the emergency room, and I don't know if it was a doctor or a nurse, refused to provide them care. Would your bill lead to that consequence?
Yeah, Representative Landry, you're giving me these scenarios with really not enough detail to make a determination.
I guess my question is, if a trans child goes to the emergency room, would your bill prohibit a doctor there from providing them any care?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an exception to that in the bill.
Okay, well, that's starting to happen other places. I guess this is a did you know. My understanding is that over 90% of the healthcare providers that treat trans children are mental health professionals. Is that correct?
I don't know. I do know that the majority of healthcare providers are in the mental health field.
It seems like to me this may prevent them from treating the children. I don't know if that was your intent or what I hate talking about intent. Do the words of your
counseling is nowhere in the bill. It's like I say, it's a very narrow focus, and what the bill does is laid out in pretty severe detail there. If you want to review it.
Okay. Sorry, there's just a lot of information on this now that we've all had to learn. I do a lot of work in the reproductive field, and I know that already there are OBGYNs who are thinking or making plans to leave because they're worried about their license. I have heard that there are medical providers who treat these children that are also thinking about leaving. Are you concerned that these issues will lead to a further shortage in medical professionals in Louisiana because we already have a shortage of these professionals?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm following you, Representative Landry.
That was a long question.
Why are these healthcare providers considering leaving Louisiana?
So in both the abortion concept and in arena and providers who provide this healthcare here, there's talk of, and some of them have already started to leave because they feel like they can't treat their patients without fear of arrest, for example. Since Louisiana is a state that already has a shortage of medical professionals, are you concerned that a bill like this would lead to a further loss?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that is related to this topic. And what we've seen since this body has shown to be adamantly pro-life and supportive of life, Planned Parenthood is looking for new revenue. And where they have decided to look is puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, which are very lucrative. So if any healthcare provider that's in the business of harming children is looking at leaving Louisiana, I think that would be a good thing.
To make sure I understand, you're saying that National Planned Parenthood, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, no, I'm not concerned about healthcare providers who are in the business of harming children leaving. Okay. But I do think you made a good point that now that abortion is illegal in Louisiana, Planned Parenthood and medical providers who do that kind of procedure, they're looking to replace that revenue. And, I think Planned Parenthood has even made it a point to say that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. In fact, since you brought it up,
I did miscommunicate.
I don't know if anyone saw Planned Parenthood was running a cartoon YouTube ad recently. Real, obviously tailored for kids. And what this cartoonish YouTube ad targeted toward kids did is it says, you can take puberty blockers to make your body match how you feel about yourself inside. You don't have to figure it all out right now. And Representative Landry, another point I would make is puberty blockers are extremely lucrative. I know one particular drug, Suprelin, the cash price for one dosage is apparently $50,000. So thank you for your question.
And I want to apologize that we went off on this tangent because I miscommunicated my question. Because of the new abortion bills, not just here but in other states, it's general OBGYNs who are debating leaving because of their concern that they can't provide adequate health care to pregnant women. So I did not mean...
Well, since you just made the point that 90% of providers participating in this arena are mental health practitioners, yes. I do not think that's a legitimate concern.
Okay, well, it's not a lot, too. And just to follow up on Rep. Freeman, the puberty blockers that are used for gymnasts, How is that not a sort of gender-based issue? Because it is keeping these girls, they're keeping them as girls and not from moving to teenagers or women. And to me, that's gender-related.
The gender is nowhere in this bill. This bill deals strictly with biological sex. And the only prohibited procedures would be those designed to alter biological sex or the appearance of biological sex to one's perception.
Okay, well, I'll just agree with you on that. And then something I asked you about earlier about surgeries for breast augmentation or reduction or nose jobs for someone under 18 years old. To me, those are related to gender. Based on your last answer, could you answer that as well?
Again, gender is not in this bill, but those procedures that you mentioned would not be impacted by this legislation.
Okay. That's my last question. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Madam Clerk, let's take up the amendment.
Mr. Speaker and members, the first amendment set is a one-page set offered by Representative Firment, set number 2880.
Representative Firment on your amendment.
Yes, so I believe the first three amendments are more or less technical in nature. Amendments 4, 5, and 6 were designed just to bring a little clarity to the language and to alleviate concerns of some in the medical field who thought the language was potentially a little too open-ended. And then the final amendment of note, I believe, would be Amendment 7 and 8, which slightly changes the time that someone injured by these procedures would have to pursue a civil action.
All right. Any objection to the adoption of the amendment? Representative Willett objects. All right. We have a question on it. Representative Amy Freeman for a question.
Representative Firment, on amendment number 5, you're deleting tell me what you're doing. You're deleting line 2 and 3 and inserting attempt to alter a minor's appearance, an attempt to validate a minor's perception of his sex. And Representative Landry just talked about nose jobs and breast reductions that sometimes minor children get. So that are those? What is this particular amendment
what this
doing?
amendment does is clarify that those procedures are not affected.
So it's a clarification to say that is not affected.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Representative.
All right. Representative Firment offers up an amendment which Representative Willett objects to. All those in favor of the amendment vote yea. Those opposed vote nay. The clerk will open machines. Members, vote your machines. Vote your machines, members. Hooval, yes. McCormick, yes. Horton, yes. Ogeron, yes. Roy Dow, yes. Stefanski, yes. Nelson, yes. You through voting? Through voting, members? All right, close it up. 70 yeas, 28 nays, and the amendment is adopted. Back on the bill. Question on the bill, Representative Stagney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You talked about England, Finland, Sweden. Let's get a little closer. Have you heard of the American Medical Association? What about the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists? What about the American Academy of Nursing and the American Psychiatric Association? I'll repeat the question. Any of those groups, the AMA, American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, American Academy of Nursing, American Psychiatric Association, have you heard of any of those?
Yes.
Okay. So all of those and many others have issued policy statements underscoring the medical necessity of gender-affirming care. Now, you've stood up there and said there's no need for that type of care. I just want to be sure, is that your position?
Yes.
Okay. If they are performing that care, and there are studies that show it increases that youth life, Do you think it's worth performing?
Yeah, there's no study to suggest that. In fact, the overwhelming body of evidence suggests just the opposite. And in fact, Representative Stagney, unfortunately, what we know is that many of these organizations, there's great dissent within them, and many of those organizations have, essentially been co-opted for political reasons. And, thus I opened like I did with the fact that, Europe, who's 5 years ahead of this on this, they're just flabbergasted that we've allowed politics even to enter into our medical associations.
Well, there have been medical studies, I wouldn't call them politics. There have been standards of care, I wouldn't call that politics, that have told the medical physicians what to do and how to do it. And I'm not talking, I want to come closer than even those groups. What about in this state? Last year you asked for a study on gender reassignment procedures in minors. And we talked about this in committee. How many transition surgeries, and because the only way we can gather this info is really through Medicaid. So how many have we had in Medicaid? Transition surgeries.
Okay. Are you referring to the data included in the report?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So couple of things I'll say about the report since you brought it up.
No, I just want that question. How many surgeries?
0 surgeries.
0 surgeries. How many people were actually treated with procedures? Now, there are almost 800,000 kids in this state. And this is your report. You asked for it last year.
Yeah, well, hey, it wasn't my report because I certainly didn't generate it.
Oh, so you disagree with it?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there were 21 kids in 2017, and I'm going to go up to 2021. There were 33, then 35, and 57. Out of 800,000 kids.
Representative Stagney.
What is that percentage, I'm asking?
Representative Stagney, is there an acceptable number of kids to sterilize in Louisiana in a year?
We didn't sterilize any kids, did we?
Sure we did. Sure.
They prescribed
so one
the
thing. So
medical
let's do this. Let's take the report at face value for a minute.
I tell you what, Rep. I'm going to ask questions.
Up. Listen. Questions and answers only. If you want to debate it, we'll come to the floor.
I respond to the question about the report.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Let's take the report at face value for a second. It shows that chemical treatments for children have almost tripled since 2017. That's in line with what we see happening around the country. It shows a 40% increase in children being treated from 2020 to 2021. What it does confirm, Representative Stagney, is that there are 10-year-old kids in Louisiana being given puberty blockers, which we know negatively impacts brain development, bone density, the formation of sexual organs, and likely sterility and fertility.
And many of them are still alive, Representative Firment.
Okay.
So again, let me say that we've gone from 21
and actually I'm not through
to 57 in a 5-year period. Many of those are the same kids.
Can I finish answering the question on the report? Okay. You asked about the report, so I'd like to go ahead and make...
Well, it's not open-ended in a report. It's a lengthy report. So if you can finish answering that question, I'll go on to another one.
Okay. Yes, so you did mention some of these organizations, and they're actually cited in the report. For example, WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It's an activist political association, and in fact, the report cited Standard of Care 6 for good reason. Standard of Care 8 that has been released removes a chapter on ethics, includes a chapter on eunuchs, and also says there's no minimum age, there's no recommended minimum age for any invasive sex change procedure except phalloplasty. So that's one of the organizations that is cited in the
Rep.
report.
Firment, the
I've got a lot more to say if you'd like for me to.
No, you can say it on your close. I'm going to ask some questions because the groups I was talking about are renowned medical associations. I wasn't talking about that group, and I never asked you any question regarding that. In committee, did the number of us feel like that surgery under 18, of which they've had none, parental consent, of which we don't have in this state right now. We wanted parental consent after 2 years of counseling, which is a standard of care. Then and only then they could prescribe hormones. You didn't like that. You rejected it because you think this is some kind of transgender.
So Representative Stagney, nothing I'm saying is opinion. What I'm giving you is facts, and these procedures, puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, are experimental procedures. They've been proven to be experimental. They're often irreversible, and they're very damaging in what they do to a child's body. From my perspective, that's not up for debate. But if you want to cite a specific study from a specific organization, I'd be happy to address it.
If we had such a problem in this state, why did we have to get someone from another state to come in and testify? This is happening in less than 1% of those kids, and they need the care that these major medical organizations are saying they need, but you're saying they shouldn't get it.
Representative Stagney, if you're trying to make the point that only surgeries are harmful to kids, I think, obviously we can reject that premise based on science. Puberty blockers and hormone treatments are really just as damaging and irreversible, and I'd be happy to review that data
there are
with
some
you.
medical treatments taken out of context that could be damaging in any situation. We're talking about less than 1% of our kids who require this care under their doctor's orders. And these parents are the ones taking their kids. But we want to talk about parental consent, but we want to control what other people and their kids and their doctors do. I just don't think that's good policy. Thank you, Representative.
Representative Stagney, you might recall that one of the parents who testified in committee said she knew her little girl was a boy because as a kid she ate green vegetables. I think it's appropriate at times for the state to step in and do what's right for kids.
All right. Next question, Representative Wilford Carter.
Speaker, I'm trying to understand the provision that deals with the suits, that you can file suit for violation of this provision, of this statute. Who has the right to file a suit? Would it be the parents, the child, or anybody?
Yeah, so obviously the person who's harmed can file a suit. And Representative Carter, I know that parents do have legal rights on behalf of their children, and I'm not going to make an assumption, but my intent would certainly be that if a child is injured, and we know children are being injured by these procedures, then that right to pursue justice and to pursue legal action would extend to the parent as well.
So the parent or the child, or both? Both would have a cause of action.
Okay. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to put myself out on a limb answering that question, but the injured party can seek justice and file a suit. Whatever Louisiana law allows as far as the rights of parents to file suit on behalf of their children would apply in this matter.
Because the child couldn't file as a minor, so the parent would be the one to file for the child, or the natural tutor of the child, or the legal tutor of the child. So number one, we're not elevating. We're not saying kids under the age of 18 can file suit. We're not doing that in this bill.
No.
And we providing a prescriptive period of basically 3 years.
No. So what the amendment did is it extended that to 12 years from the age of majority.
Okay,
So to 30 years old.
So then a child could wait until up to 30 years old. Okay.
Yeah, or now there's another provision in there as well, which says, suit can also be filed within 3 years from the time the person discovered or reasonably should have discovered that the injury or damages were caused by the violation.
And so when you say in the injured party, you're not talking about somebody other than the child and or the parents.
Right. I don't know. I don't want to make a blanket statement and say that under no circumstance would some sort of guardian be able to file, but yeah, generally I think that's correct.
Well, okay. We also are taking the license of the healthcare provider. We're taking the license, the occupation license of the healthcare provider. Then we authorize and suit against the healthcare provider to include if he writes a prescription for a child who he had nothing to do with a sex change operation on. So he writes a prescription in any of these prescriptions enumerated in this bill, then he'd be subject to have his license taken and sued for up to 12.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm not an attorney, but the civil remedies would only be available for violations of this law. And it's very narrow in scope, and the procedures that are prohibited are clearly defined and laid out.
All right. Thank you.
All right, Representative Marino for a question.
Representative Firment, you started off talking about what your motives are in this bill. Do you support the idea of people being transgender, either adults or children?
Yeah, this bill is not about sexual orientation or transgender. This is about protecting kids from experimental medical procedures.
Yeah, I know you said that, but could you answer my question? Do you support the idea that either an adult or a child could be
Representative
transgender?
Marino, respectfully, I'm going to keep the conversation on the merits of the bill.
I'll take that as a no.
All right, Representative Green for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Firment, you stated earlier that there's evidence, or let me ask you this. What evidence do you have to suggest that a child undergoing puberty blockers is dangerous to that child's health? Can you give me any data to support that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and again, the first thing you notice when you start researching this issue, and if we have time, which we may, we'll even get back to the LDH report, and they've got data in there that suggests the impacts of puberty blockers. So the latest study from Sweden, it's easily able to be found, that came out last month, said that puberty blocker treatment in children with gender dysphoria should be considered experimental. Sweden, one of the countries that stopped puberty blockers on minors. In fact, one Swedish researcher who participated in the study said, what we call GnRH, puberty blocker treatment, is chemical castration, and it can affect mental health in an unintended, undesirable way. We also know that in 2022, the FDA added a warning label to puberty blockers for pseudotumor cerebri. That's a condition that causes brain swelling of the optic nerve, vision loss, headache, dizziness, nausea. A 2022 English study.
Do you have any examples?
Let me finish, if that's okay. You asked a question. I'd like to give you a good, thorough answer. A 2022 study of the Tavistock Gender Clinic, the biggest gender clinic in the world, also gives us great insight into the damaging effects of puberty blockers. That study concluded a pubescent child prescribed puberty blockers who goes on to take cross-sex hormones, as almost every does, will be infertile and unable to orgasm. The Endocrine Society, which I don't know if Rep. Stagney referenced the Endocrine Society, but proponents of these procedures place great weight on the Endocrine Society. So when you review scientifically the work of the Endocrine Society, you see that their studies are rated low or very low when it comes to the effectiveness of these treatments. the only data that was rated by scientific agencies from the Endocrine Society as of moderate value is data that proved bone density loss, altered adult height, and impaired memory from taking puberty blockers. A 2019 study from the British Medical Journal said this about puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are being used in the context of profound scientific ignorance. Treatments for under 18 gender dysphoric children and adolescents remain largely experimental. There are a large number of unanswered questions that include the age at start, reversibility, adverse events, long-term effects on mental health, quality of life, bone mineral density, osteoporosis, and cognition. The current evidence base does not support informed decision-making and safe practice in children. I can go on. Representative Green, what's really reprehensible when you dig into this is so many of these organizations, they start, who are proponents of this, they start with a conclusion, and they come to that conclusion regardless of what the data says, and that is especially the case with puberty blockers, and there's ample evidence. I can go on.
Do you have any experience in your personal life with someone who has undergone or taken puberty blockers?
No.
Do you know that I have?
Okay.
Do you know I have a member of my family who underwent this procedure?
Okay.
And so with that member of my family, consulting with their parent, under your bill, you would take the authority away from my family member's parent to decide what is in the best interest of their child. Is that what you're trying to do with your bill?
Representative Green, and I'm very respectful and sympathetic of your situation, but in light of what scientific evidence shows us about puberty blockers, I do not see a situation where that would ever be the recommended course of treatment.
Do you believe in limited government?
Sure.
Is this the definition of limited government?
I believe the most compelling duty of government is to protect its citizens, no one more than vulnerable children.
Do you honestly think a parent who cares about their child would ever do anything that would put their child's life in danger?
Representative Green, I just recounted the story.
It's a yes or no question, Representative.
I just recounted the story of the lady who said she knew her daughter was a boy because she ate vegetables. Yes. Unfortunately, we've got a whole State Department dedicated to protecting kids, often from unfortunate situations at home.
Representative, are you aware that you're applying a one-size-fits-all approach to something that I think is a little more nuanced?
I would disagree.
So, Representative, why do you know better than, let's say, and bring it home from a personal perspective, why do you know better than my family member in their interaction, their raising of their child? Why do you know better?
Yeah, Representative Green, I'm not saying that I know anything better. I'm saying that what we do as legislators is we take the body of evidence that's available to us. You know, we've identified a problem, and this bill will protect families. It will protect children.
Are you aware I think that we should leave that up to parents to decide?
I respect your opinion.
Thank you.
Representative Larry Freeman for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Firment, you asked about a bunch of different medical societies and obstetrics and gynecology and all that. But here's my question. Do we, as a legislature, set the policy for the state?
Yes.
And if those groups would come out and say, you know, we think abortion is good and should be legal, we as the legislature decides whether the abortion's legal or illegal, don't we?
Representative Freeman, many of those organizations would say just that.
And when you were asked whether we know better than someone else, I believe you said as a state and as a government, sometimes we have to step in and set policy that may be protecting children. Is that true?
Absolutely.
And is this exactly what your bill is doing?
Yes, it is.
It's a good bill. Thank you for your bill, and I support it.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Amy Freeman for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Firment, you just mentioned the study on gender reassignment procedures on minors from March of 2023. And I'd just like to draw to your attention on page 4.
Okay, now
Question
you're
number-
referencing the Louisiana Department of Health study?
The study you just referenced, the LDH study.
Okay.
I just heard you reference it in somebody's question. Question number 1, the number and types of procedures performed annually. Do you know how many number and types of these procedures are performed annually? That was question number 1 in the LDH study.
So Representative Freeman, one of the great disappointments of this report is the resolution we passed never instructed LDH to limit the study to Medicaid. And, what good is it with only partial data? So one thing. But
I'm asking a question. Do you remember that question? The number and types of procedures performed annually. That's the question. First question on the study you referenced.
Now the study resolution did not stipulate that was to be confined to Medicaid.
Well, that's the study resolution that you just referenced. So I'm just pulling it up based on your conversation with another member.
The report was not prepared in accordance with the resolution.
Well, I'm not familiar with the resolution because I don't recall it.
I am. I was the author of it.
But I will. Did you know that 0 surgeries were ever performed on minors from 2017 to 2021?
Based on the Medicaid data submitted in this report? Yeah, you're right.
Did you know that Children's Hospital that services the entire state is in my district?
Okay.
Did you know that they don't perform the majority of these surgeries? So we'll just call them bottom surgery for reference point.
Great.
Did you know that? So some of the things in this study evidently are lining up exactly with what the hospitals and the doctors, did you know, in the district that I represent. Did you know on question number 4, talks about the number of procedures and clinics performing the procedures. Do you know how many did on number 4?
Yeah, and Representative Freeman, just to be clear, this data was confined to Medicaid.
What was it that you referenced in here? Because there was something in here you liked.
I think it's great that 0 or minimum number of these horrific surgeries are being performed on kids in Louisiana. But, as I've stated previously and as I've answered other questions, the chemical procedures are extremely experimental, extremely dangerous, and are also a big part of this legislation. In fact, the biggest part.
What was it that you referenced on the LDH report? Because you specifically referenced something. So there's something you like in
I've
this
got
report.
a lot to talk about. So you asked, and that was an open-ended question. So Representative Freeman, this report is just a perfect illustration of what I cited from The Economist and their criticism of how we handle this issue. Unfortunately, we've allowed politics to cloud our judgment. So let's stay on page 4 because that kind of sets the tone. So they give us a glossary of frequently used terms and abbreviations: AFAB, AMAB, assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth. That doesn't tell me anything. That's a political statement in itself. Now, let's go down. They make the statement on page 4, the use of cross-sex hormones and or puberty blockers has decreased since 2018. Now, given their understanding of biology, I guess I see how they would say 57 is less than 35. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe that's just an error. But I think we would all agree, based on the data, that these procedures have increased, even though their report says they haven't.
Tell me which section that is where it says it's decreased.
Yeah, KQ2.
KQ2, it says.
The middle of the summary says use of cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers has decreased since 2018. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the same line. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same line.
Okay, so let's just say
that's to be true.
Let's just say that was an error, and I'd like to finish answering the question if I can.
Yes.
Okay. So they basically make the point, and I want to get back to who prepared the report and some concerns there. There's concerns with Medicaid billing, I think we talked about. But let's just look at maybe the most telling part. They more or less say, hey, this report we prepared prepared as garbage. So turn with me to page 13.
I don't have the full report.
Okay,
printed,
page
so-
13, they say the included studies as such are unlikely to represent the transgender and gender diverse population of youth in the U.S. In other words, it doesn't tell us anything. Page 14, limitations across systematic reviews and individual studies include the small number of individuals enrolled in each study, variation in outcome, assessment tools used, inconsistent follow-up durations, and selection bias. They are pointing out the shortcomings in their own data. Let's stay on page 14. Long-term studies over 12 months are rare, especially physical and mental health studies. I'm going to come back to the bottom of page 14. Page 15, the authors also noted, this is in regards to puberty blockers, the authors also noted the limited number of small observational studies in this field. The authors highlighted that although hormonal treatment is associated with greater physical alignment of appearance, the effect on psychosocial or cognitive outcomes is uncertain. The authors highlighted the high risk of selection bias and small sample size. I can go on. Several times in this report, they make it a point to point out the insufficiency of their own data. Now let's go back to page 14.
I'd like to ask you a question to follow up on that particular piece.
Let me finish this if I can. So they cite a New England Journal of Medicine study on page 14, and the gender industry has been citing this study as proof that psychological outcomes are improved. Let me tell you a little bit about this New England Journal of Medicine study that was.
Can we get back to the LDH study because that's
this was a taxpayer-funded study. The gender industry, including a doctor that testified in committee a couple of weeks ago, cited this study as his basis for why we should continue these studies. 2 of the participants committed suicide. Taxpayer funds were used to pay for this studies done by 4 gender clinics. 2 of the patients who participated committed suicide. Approximately 30% dropped out. The improvements that were cited on a scale of 0 to 100 were single-digit improvements. Several members of Congress have written a letter calling for further investigation into this horrific study that taxpayers paid for.
Well, are you aware that this is a very, very small percentage of the population in our state and in our nation and in our world? 1% or less, shall we say? That is what I've learned. So are you aware of that? Are you aware that it's a very small percentage of the population?
Is there an acceptable number of children that we should allow to be harmed every year?
Are you aware that this specific legislation would, even if you look at the report, would have a small number of participants because it's a small population of people that we are talking about who are only asking to have the treatment based on their parents' decisions as a family. Do you understand that?
From my perspective, regardless of the number of people involved, if we can protect children, it's a worthwhile endeavor.
And do you think that we're protecting children who, as you just told me when you quoted the New England study, are suicidal sometimes because the level of suicide amongst these children is 4 times higher than other children? Did you know that?
Okay, what study are you citing?
I'm from doctors who treat these professionals.
What study are they citing?
I don't have the study on the top of my head.
Is there a specific doctor that we can consult?
There are plenty of doctors at the hospitals across the state that I would be happy to give you their phone numbers, but not on the microphone.
So let's stick with the data and the scientific research. Perhaps the greatest.
Can we go back to the suicides from the New England study? Because you actually told me there were suicides.
Let's, if you don't mind, I'm going to follow up on the question that you asked me. So you brought up, you said these children are 4 times more likely to commit suicide. So let me just counter that with real information if I can. Okay. The Tavistock Gender Clinic was the biggest gender clinic in the world in London until they shut it down. But we've got a great data set there to draw from and to study. Okay, a study of that population shows 0.03% of children committed suicide. That's slightly elevated from what the general population is, but that's in line with children who suffer from things like depression and anxiety and anorexia and ADHD. The other thing that was very notable about that study, half of the suicides were by kids who were receiving chemical treatments. Half of the suicides were by kids who had yet to enter the program. So there was no differential between the kids receiving the chemical treatments and those who weren't. Perhaps the best well-known study comes from Sweden, which
is the study from the UK. It's United Kingdom residents only, correct?
Yes.
Is that really relevant to Louisiana?
Yes.
And why?
Because children across the Western world have been observed to act in the same manner.
Did you know that children are always impacted by peer pressure at some level?
Absolutely. And look, this...
Did you know...
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is a social contagion. It's increased, at least tripled here in the United States in the past few years. From 2010 to 2020, it increased by 5,000% among adolescent females, and London, Finland has experienced similar. So why are we aggressively treating a social contagion with experimental medical procedures? Thank you for making that point.
Do you have any of these studies that are based in data that come from United States children? Any? Because you're talking about Finland, Sweden, United Kingdom. Those are not parts of the United States. So do you have any studies similar to those three? That's a yes or no.
Yeah,
similar to those three?
So I just
are in the United States.
I just cited a trial being performed in the United States where 2 children committed suicide while they were participating in the study. And
where was that? Where was that based? Which state?
It was the Boston Children's Hospital, I think the Cleveland Clinic. I mean, it's readily available data.
Okay, well, I would love to see a copy of a study in the United States.
Okay, well, no. So look, I've got the letter
you
that
can give it to me after we're finished.
Facts are dangerous things, Representative Freeman.
Mr. Speaker.
Okay, hold on. I've got that information for you, Representative Freeman. It's let's see. The Boston Children's Hospital was one of. By the way, one of the researchers who participated in the study. She claims that children can know their gender identity from the womb. But I've got a lot of good information on that particular study if you like it.
All right, let's take up the next question. Representative Green for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me a second bite of this apple. Rep. Firment, talk to me about the enforcement mechanism found on page 4, lines 3 through 6. How do you intend to enforce this statute should it become law?
Let me get there. I got a lot going on here. I'm sorry. Tell me the page again.
Page 4, lines 3 through 6, paragraph B.
Okay. The Attorney General may bring an action. Is that what you're referring to?
That's correct.
Yeah, I would defer to the Attorney General's office on that. Should it become?
Sure, Bill. You don't know how the Attorney General will be able to enforce this through his Department of Justice?
Yeah, I answered your question. I would defer to the Attorney General.
Do you know?
I answered your question, Representative Green.
Does the Attorney General, at any way, shape, or form, consult with you about this section of your bill?
No, he has not.
Is it fair to say that if the Attorney General would have to enforce your bill under this section of law, that his department would increase expenses as a result of enforcing this bill?
Yeah, it says the Attorney General may bring an action, so it sounds to me like you're engaging in a lot of speculation there.
But if he did, as a result of that, would his department have to incur
Representative Green, if what you're trying to do is get this referred to appropriations to delay this, I would disagree with the tactic. I do not think you make a valid point.
I'm just asking a question.
And I answered it.
And so if the Attorney General were to have the ability, discretion, which you're giving him to enforce this bill through his department, is it fair to say that he would have to expend department resources in enforcing this bill?
No, I don't think that's fair to say. Again, it stipulates the Attorney General may bring an action.
Why not?
I answered your question.
No, you didn't.
Well, may have not answered to your satisfaction, but I answered it.
Do you have a fiscal note?
No, why would we need a fiscal note when we are decreasing the number of covered procedures? That's sort of counterintuitive and illogical.
Because are you aware that you're giving the Department of Justice the discretion to enforce this bill, and as a result of that, it could potentially result in increased time in hiring an attorney and legal costs, which would come out of state general fund. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I reject that speculative premise.
Have you ever worked for the Department of Justice?
No, I'm not a lawyer.
Do you know I'm a lawyer?
Yes, I do.
Do you know I work for the Department of Justice?
I know now.
Do you know that I'm very well aware of the costs that are incurred by the department with respect to ORM?
Okay.
Are you aware that that comes out of state general fund?
Hey, you're the one making these statements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
But yeah, no, I don't think we need a fiscal note. And again, I think everybody knows what you're trying to do. Thank you for your questions.
All right, to the floor on the bill, Representative Marino.
I'm going to try to keep this short. I don't want to be here long, and no one wants to hear me talk long. Thank you. This is culture wars again. This is an issue designed to divide us. It's an issue designed to separate us and put us at odds with each other. If this is really about protecting kids, then why are we ignoring a lot of things that do protect these kids? Why are we not addressing things that really help these kids? Well, I question the motive of the author about what this is really about, and I asked him if he actually supports the idea of transgender people in general, children or adults, and that was a question that he can't answer. But I know what the answer is. The answer is no. Gender-affirming care for transgender kids. Many studies have shown gender-affirming care for transgender kids reduces depression, reduces suicide, and other devastating consequences that trans teens, when they are forced to undergo puberty in the sex that they were assigned to at birth. If you really want to help kids, let's help kids. Let's first of all just acknowledge that they exist, that transgender kids are seen, they belong, and they are loved. That is where I want us to begin, and then we can start talking about what would be the best way to help these kids and stop harming these kids. And I ask you to reject this bill. Thank you.
All right, Representative Newell to the floor on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I had a colleague last week. I thought he had lost his mind when he told me I needed to learn my place. But then he told me my place was to take the floor on the issue. And that is what I'm doing. I'm standing in opposition to this bill because it is unconstitutional. Every bill that we have brought up about transgender has seemingly been unconstitutional. This legislation is unconstitutional because it only applies to those children whose perception of themselves is different and inconsistent with the sex of which they were born as. This legislation still allows for parents to use the puberty blockers on their children who are going through puberty too early or too fast. So it is not stopping puberty blockers for all children, just a subset of children. So therefore, it is violation of the Constitution, Equal Protection Clause. The use of these puberty blockers have been FDA approved for years. These puberty blockers would stop an 8-year-old from having a period. If any of you all know an 8-year-old, that is too early. And parents have access to those blockers now. And why should we take that away from them? I think it was Rep. Freeman, and I'm probably sure it was Rep. Romero, that have pointed to the fact, again, this is a vulnerable population of children. These pieces of legislation are mean and dismissive. These children, period, are already vulnerable, trying to be friends, trying to fit in, trying to make it in society and become socially normal. This is ostracizing a group of children who have more questions about themselves than what we would consider as regular kids. And we cannot continue to put legislation through this and think that our children will feel safe and okay in the state of Louisiana. We want to have economic development. We want to have growth in our state, but how can we if we are telling these subset of children, you don't matter, telling the parents, that child of yours does not matter, they're going to leave this state. And then what do we have? We will not have a future. We will just have a state, a piece of land with no perceived future, no children to leave this mess to fix too. So I stand with you and ask you not to support this, because although it's been a topic all across the state, we don't do anything else other states do. I tried to pass adult use marijuana. You said no other states are doing that. So why is this okay? Because other states are doing it. Everything is not okay. And we don't have to take it just because Texas and Florida are doing it. Let's stand up and be the first to do something different for a change. This is not it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right. You want to close?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to briefly respond to some of the comments that were made. I know Representative Moreno is very passionate and has a good heart, but it's unfortunate that he would come up here and state that he questions my motives. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. That's why I'm here. Okay, so again, just unfortunate, but I understand this is a passionate topic. So, look, this bill is about protecting kids. Representative Newell made a good point. There's an exception in the bill for children experiencing precocious puberty. So, she said that the FDA had approved puberty blockers, and that's just not the case. They've not been approved for gender dysphoria. So, again, I just want to go back to what I started with. This isn't a political issue. It's about protecting kids. I want to leave you with a number. That number is 100 million. That's the approximate population of the states around us that have stepped up and made the right decision to protect their children. Let's not create a safe haven for children in those states. Let's protect our kids. Let's protect kids in other states. And I ask for your favorable passage.
All right. Representative Firment. Representative Green calls for a lockout. Will 20 members join Representative Green in the lockout? Clerk will open the machine. Lockout is obvious. Quorum call, members. Quorum call. Vote your machines, members. Quorum call. Nelson's here. Green's here. Hughes is here. Through voting? Through voting? All right, lock it up. 96 members in a quorum. All right. Representative Firment moves final passage. All those in favor of the bill vote yea. Those opposed vote nay. The clerk will open the machines. Members, vote your machines. Green, no. Through voting? Through voting, members? All right, close it up. 71, 24, 71 yeas, 24 nays, and the bill is passed. Representative Firment moves to reconsider the bill by which the vote finally passed without objection, so ordered.
House Bill 649 by Representative Eccles, Title 36, Louisiana Music Trail, to create the Louisiana